Okay, my name is Jimena. I'm coming from Chile. I work for Arcadis. And in Chile, there is no much local information for climate change. All the information that we have comes from abroad. And that's a major concern for us because society or the community doesn't believe much on that information. And they believe more on what they feel or on what they see. And it's not very precisely. So we have to struggle with that and to struggle with the license that the people has to give to the information that it's providing in the EIA and therefore to have the approvals of the projects.
Thank you. Another one?
I am Lisa McCourt from the South African Department of Environmental Affairs. We've been generally very quiet on Africa and what is happening in Africa. I think in South Africa we are very progressive, I think, in terms of climate as well. We have been including the effects of the environment on development since the inception of our regulation of EIA in 1997. And we have strengthened it in our 2006 and 2010 revisions of our EIA regulations and of our Act in 2008. We are also currently in the process of developing guidance in terms of specifically applying that to climate. It's always been our intention, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. You might know that the next COP is in South Africa in the city of Durban after Cancun. So we are very, very aware of the climate issues. We also have very good information, some in development. Our mitigation scenarios is very scientifically based and used already extensively. Our draft first policy on climate change has been approved for publication in our cabinet in this week, and it will be gazetted. And it includes the requirement that in any decision making, both on policy and project level, the impacts on and the impacts by climate change must be considered in that decision-making process. The how is where we need guidance and capacity development, and I think the very simple, although I know that it is a summary position of the Netherlands, would certainly help us in our guidance development in this regard. We are also finalizing our vulnerability atlas, which is, in terms of the adaptation, very important for us. So the scope is certainly there in terms of environmental impact assessment, both on strategic policy sector level as well as on project level, to incorporate it. And that is also the intent of the whole SADC region. Just as a little bit of feedback.
Thank you for that. I might also mention that the session was not supposed to be looking at, how can the developed country models be applied to the developing world? We could have addressed that in the barriers, but it is a very relevant question. I can speak for Tajikistan. Craig Davis and I work on the Tajikistan pilot program for climate resilience. And we can say that in the case of Tajikistan, which is probably common for many developing countries, there is a national communications to the UNFCCC. There are some modeling work that's shown. There's some scenario development, but that's typically was done by either UNDP support or bilateral donors to provide them that help. And the terms of the issues of capacity building that money raises is very critical, and that's a question that we'll be addressing, is how much is needed. It clearly seems that they need education on what is climate change, what does it mean for the country, but they also need basic strengthening of data acquisition from Hydromet. But the jury is not decided, or you want to say it, it's not clear how much in-house capability they need to have in terms of scenario development and modeling, and that's actually one of the parts that the Asia Development Bank will be working on, doing some review to say how much do they really need in-house, knowing that for a poor country that has a very modest budget, it might make sense to just improve the basic data acquisition and get some training and capacity and understanding there. But the actual capability to do the kind of scenario development we see in the examples on the podium probably is a bit of a stretch for them. But again, this sounds like it would be a good topic at the next forum. I think, is Rita here? Okay, do we have a little more time? I know lunch was supposed to start 5 minutes ago, but let's take another 2 or 3 questions. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you. I'm Phil Byer from...
Sorry, we'll have to answer the previous question, too.
From Canada. It's more of a comment, but I'd like any response from people. Over the last 10 years, I had done reviews of a lot of the environmental assessments in Canada with respect to addressing climate change, and I was depressed then, and I'm depressed now. About the poor state of practice around the world. And the question that comes to me is why? Has anybody really looked at what are the reasons, the motivations? Kenneth, as a lawyer, naturally thinks about laws and complying with them. Well, that's fine, but we don't have many laws, or when we have them that say you shall consider, as we do in Canada, consider the effects of climate on the project. There's still a huge wide range at which people can do it. Or not do it. So I think one of the things would be I'm starting to think, well, why is it the proponents, why is it that funding agencies, why is it that the government reviewers don't act, and that we are in a state now that we are in? Because do we really have another 20 years to get our practice in place? Canada, the one that you mentioned, Confederation Bridge, where they explicitly considered sea rise, was 1990. That was pretty long ago. So the question is, if they could do it at a very crude level, the Confederation Bridge, the piers were raised 1 meter to anticipating climate change. If they could do it in 1990, then some simple things can be done now, even if we don't have the scenarios, or we don't think we have the scenarios. It's really a matter of will, it's of interest, so why is it proponents aren't doing it? They don't think that they can do it, or practitioners. They don't have the tools. Is guidance really what we need, or is it the will to do it? With that said, I'm now going to turn to one solution, if I can.
Unfortunately, we have like 3 minutes left.
Okay, let me just give you one suggestion.
We'll answer the last 2 your
I'm a
questions.
professional engineer. We had a talk from somebody this morning about Quebec Hydro. Professional engineers have a responsibility to factor in climate on their projects. And I'm now focusing purely on the issue of adaptation of projects on the effect of climate. And I would suggest that professional engineers should be called to account for not factoring in future possible climate change.
Thanks for the question and the comment. Again, we would like to spend another hour on that one, but we had 2 questions, yours and the previous one on capacity building, I think. Would any of the panelists like to respond?
I'll take on the capacity building question, and the timing is perfect right now. We're moving ahead with this capacity building initiative that I raised with the last commenter. But we'll be looking both at the enforcement of environmental impact assessment requirements and the enforceability of commitments resulting from the application of those requirements. We're doing this in conjunction with 2 of our regional networks, one which will be in East Africa, but I really welcome the opportunity to talk to our colleague from Southern Africa as well. And the other one will be with our Asian regional network. India was well represented at this meeting. This is a project funded by ADB and USAID, as I mentioned, and India will be prominent in that project. So, we welcome this. It's just the beginning right now. Trying to figure out how to apply the principles of compliance and enforcement in the context of EIA. So, welcome that.
I'd like to give a very short response to 3 questions, India, Chile, Canada. India, you mentioned the fact that India doesn't have an institution such as the NCEA. Well, it's the formal viewpoint of the NCEA that every country should have an institution like the NCEA. So having said that, what we do see is that quality assurance is important. And most countries are working on it right now. Basically, there are 2 alternatives. One of them is certification, of experts. Personally, I'm not really very much in favor of that system because it takes a lot of time to do it, a lot of time to keep it updated. It's like, and the other thing is to have a good quality review board, like the one that I am in. And we see now around the globe a couple of initiatives by countries who say, listen, we are interested. Could the NCA help us a little bit in looking at that system and how it might work in our country? And we're willing to help there. So that's one thing. Secondly is capacity development. What is the Netherlands doing? Well, within its own country, I mean, we're building on our EIA system now for like 25 years. And this is 25 years of constant capacity development for all stakeholders involved, not just the environmental people, but also the sector people, not just lawyers, but also engineers and experts, whatever. So this is, it takes time, and it's an ongoing thing. We have programs with countries in which we try to help them in strengthening their systems. And again, it's not an easy thing. You have to work with multiple stakeholders over at least 10 years, and then capacity is developing. But it is possible and it's happening. Both Chile and Canada, I think, raised the issue like, yeah, but what if people don't want to? I mean, how can you convince them to do it if they don't want to? I think that Courtney already said you always have to build a business case. If they really don't want to, you have to bring in the lawyers. If that doesn't work, give up. If they're hesitating, if they're like, yeah, maybe, but I don't know, yes, it's lots of money or whatever, then you can build a business case. But building a business case, preferably, you shouldn't have a scientist or an engineer doing that. This is another art and science. First of all, you need to start from the interest of the people. What is in it for them? And there's lots of examples that if you integrate mitigation and adaptation, it improves your project, it improves your competitive position, it improves the possibility to make more profit. So start there. It's not enough by itself. And once you've caught the attention, you can build on top of that. So start with the carrots and then slowly include the sticks. Don't throw all these scenarios or scientific information or very threatening things that makes them nervous right at the beginning, because then people will just block down. So.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists wish to? Yeah. Please.
I just had one point on capacity development with regard to climate information. I think we are focusing too much on climate change scenarios. In many countries, we don't even have good publicly available information on the climatology of the region. And even if such information exists, it's not available to a whole range of stakeholders. So I think that is something that should be an urgent priority for development agencies as well as national governments. On climate change scenarios, I think the question of whether they can be outsourced or there should be in-house capacity, I think that's open for discussion. Some of the problems we have, I think, when we outsource climate scenarios and you have particular modeling groups flying into a country, is often you have results coming out of one particular climate model and which are just handed over to the developing country. I think there needs to be a process where there's a systematic evaluation of the outputs before they're accepted into a national decision process.
Thank you. Well, with that, I know we're a little bit over. Why don't we give a round of applause?